The band had just started playing when the groom crossed the ballroom floor and pointed at an old man in a worn gray suit. Nearly 200 guests turned to watch. The groom wore a tuxedo cut to his exact measurements, the kind that cost more than the old man's truck. He didn't lower his voice. He wanted the room to hear. "Get the broke old man out of my wedding." The old man didn't argue. He didn't raise his hands or ask for an explanation. He looked down at the small card in his fingers. The seating card with his own name on it, the one the groom had just torn in half. He folded it once, carefully, along the tier. Then he slid it into the breast pocket of that worn gray suit and stood up. 200 guests watched a father get walked out of his own daughter's wedding. Not one of them knew that the man being escorted toward the door owned the bank that was, at that very moment, the only thing keeping the groom from ruin. This is the story of Raymond Sutherland. Bradford Hale believed everything in that ballroom belonged to him. The venue, the flowers, the string quartet, the guest list vetted for the right last names, the contracts on his desk back in Charlotte, the future he had already drawn up in his head, and the woman in the white dress at the center of it all, Claire, his bride, who had spent the last hour trying to catch her father's eye across the room and failing. Brad measured people the way other men checked the time. A glance at the wrist, a glance at the parking lot, and he had you filed. Cheap watch, old truck, off-the-rack suit, nobody. He had looked at Raymond Sutherland exactly once, weeks earlier, and filed him under nobody. What Brad never learned was the one habit that told you everything about the man he'd just thrown out. Raymond Sutherland wrote the date on the back of every check that passed through his hands. Not the front, where the law needs it. The back. In fountain pen ink, small and level, the way a man does when he has spent a lifetime keeping track of exactly what moved, and when, and to whom. He had been doing it for 40 years. He was doing it the morning of the wedding. This is the story of Raymond Sutherland, and of the day a man mistook silence for weakness. To understand what happened to Bradford Hale, you have to understand the world he thought he ruled. Brad was 34, a commercial real estate developer, and by the measures he cared about, he was winning. Hale Development Group had his name on the door. The lobby had a wall of framed renderings, glass buildings that didn't exist yet, glowing at a sunset added in post. He drove the newest model of a German sedan and traded it in before the plates got old. He knew the maître d' at 3 restaurants in Charlotte by name, and more importantly, they knew him. His flagship project was Ridgeline Commons, a mixed-use development on the edge of the city. Retail on the ground floor, offices above. He sold it as the neighborhood's future. On paper, close to $24 million of ambition. Roughly $2.4 million of that was a construction loan, drawn in stages, plus a line of credit of about $600,000 that Brad treated like a checking account. Every phase depended on the next disbursement clearing. That was fine, as long as the bank kept saying yes. Brad never worried about the bank saying yes. Banks said yes to men like him. That was the whole point of being a man like him. He had built his life on a simple theory: you could read a person's worth off the surface. The car in the driveway, the label inside the jacket, the zip code, the watch. He never tested that theory. He was that confident. When Claire told him her father was a quiet man from a small town who'd worked in banking, Brad heard tell her. He pictured a man counting other people's money behind bulletproof glass, and he never asked a single follow-up question. He was busy reading the surface. He never asked the one question that mattered. He never asked which bank held his loan. Raymond Sutherland arrived at the wedding 40 minutes early. He came in a 2004 Ford F-150 with 250,000 miles on it and a bedliner cracked from 2 decades of use. He parked it himself, away from the valet stand, because he'd never in his life handed his keys to a stranger and wasn't going to start. He wore the gray suit. It fit him the way clothes fit a man who buys good things once and keeps them, a little soft at the elbows now, pressed clean, honest. He sat near the back. He didn't work the room. He didn't introduce himself to the men in the better suits or mention what he did for a living. He watched his daughter laugh with her bridesmaids, and he was happy in the plain, unshowy way of a man who has waited a long time to see his child glad. Here is what none of those 200 guests knew, and what Brad least of all could have guessed. The bank that held Bradford Hale's construction loan, Meridian Trust and Savings, the regional lender whose next disbursement, Ridgeline Commons, could not survive without, was controlled, quietly and almost completely, through a holding company that carried a different name on the paperwork. And the loan Brad had signed carried the ordinary, boilerplate language that men like Brad never read, a material adverse change clause, and a personal guarantee. Standard terms. The kind of terms that mean nothing at all, right up until the day they mean everything. The man who controlled that holding company was sitting near the back of the room in a worn gray suit. Brad looked at that suit and read one word off it: broke. And he decided, in front of his most important guests, that the way to polish his own image was to take out the trash. So why didn't Raymond say anything? He had every card. One sentence, "I'm the man who owns your bank," that would have ended the humiliation before it began, turned the whole room around, wiped the smile off his new son-in-law's face. Any ordinary man would have said it. Most men would have said it loudly. Raymond said nothing, and the reason wasn't pride, and it wasn't some bottomless well of inner peace. It was strategy. Cold and specific. Weeks before the wedding, going through the loan files his bank had every legal right to review, Raymond saw a name he recognized: Bradford Hale. Borrower. Hale Development Group. He sat with that for a long minute. His daughter's fiancé was a customer of his own bank, a leveraged one, stretched thin across a project that was already running hot. Raymond had known Brad's exact financial position before he ever shook the young man's hand, and he had made a decision then, in his office, with the file open on the desk. He was not going to turn his daughter's wedding into a courtroom. He was not going to stand up in front of 200 people and win an argument. This was Claire's day. If he revealed who he was to shame Brad in that ballroom, the story would forever be about him. The father who caused a scene, the twist nobody saw coming. He refused to steal that from her. So he let Brad talk. He let Brad measure him by the suit and the truck and get it exactly wrong. Catastrophically wrong. Silence, for Raymond Sutherland, was not surrender, it was patience. And patience, when you're the one holding the note, is just another word for timing. The audience that had watched him get walked out started, somewhere around here, to lean forward. A man who can be insulted in front of 200 people and still fold his torn card into his pocket without a word is not a weak man. He is a man who already knows how the story ends. Raymond Sutherland did not come from money. He came up as a loan officer 40 years back, in a town where the men in better suits looked straight through him. He learned the business from the bottom, the applications, the collateral, the small tragedies of people who borrowed a little more than they could carry. A man in a fine coat could be one bad quarter from nothing. A woman in a diner uniform could be the safest loan you'd write all year. Raymond learned to read the paper, not the suit. Men who read the suit passed him over, more than once, and instead of getting bitter, he got patient, he saved. He watched the men above him make loud mistakes, and when a struggling little savings and loan came up for sale, the one that would eventually become Meridian Trust, Raymond put in everything he had and everything he could borrow, and he bought it. That was almost 3 decades ago. He built it slowly, one honest loan at a time, until it was one of the steadier regional banks in the state, and through all of it he did something unusual for a man of his means. He held his controlling stake, a little over 2/3 of the whole thing, around 68%, through a holding company that did not carry his name. Not to hide from the law. To hide from the noise. He'd seen what money did to families, how it warped children into people who expected the world to owe them. He wanted his daughter to grow up measuring people the way he did, by what they did, not what they drove. So Claire grew up in an ordinary house with a father who drove an old truck and clipped coupons and never once told her the size of what he'd built. She knew he'd worked in banking. She had no idea he owned the bank. And there was something else, the thing that would decide everything. Years earlier, watching a wealthier man use his money to crush someone who'd crossed him, Raymond had made himself a quiet promise. He would never use his power to get even. He would never bend a rule, pull a string, or make a call to punish a man for a personal slight. But he would use the law, exactly as it was written, without an ounce of mercy he wasn't required to give. Fair was fair. And fair, sometimes, is the coldest thing in the world. He kept every document. He always had. That was why, on the morning of his daughter's wedding, Raymond Sutherland knew precisely where Bradford Hale stood. Down to the dollar, down to the covenant, down to the date. The moment happened faster than it should have. Everyone in that room replayed it later. The reception was maybe an hour in. Raymond sat at his table near the back, nursing a glass of water when Brad crossed the floor. He'd had a couple of drinks. He'd just introduced his father-in-law to a pair of investors as Claire's dad from out in the county, and something about saying it out loud had curdled inside him. He looked at the old truck through the window. He looked at the gray suit, and he decided the image needed fixing. He didn't take Raymond aside. That's the part people couldn't get over afterward. He pulled him up by the arm, into the open, where the light was. "You're embarrassing my wife's family," Brad said. Raymond looked at him and said nothing. That silence seemed to enrage Brad more than any answer could have. He waved over the venue's security, two men in blazers who clearly did not want to be part of this, and told them the gentleman was leaving. He picked up Raymond's seating card off the table, the little card with Sutherland printed on it, and he tore it in half and let it fall. Claire saw it from across the room. Her face went white. She started forward and stopped, frozen between the man she'd just married and the father being turned toward the door. No shout. No rush across the floor. She stood there, a bride in a white dress, and let it happen. She'd carry that for a long time. Raymond bent down. He picked up the two halves of the torn card. He folded them together and put them in his breast pocket. Then he walked out on his own, before the blazers had to touch him. No scene, no speech. The band, mercifully, kept playing. Bradford Hale went back to his investors. For the moment, he felt like a man who had solved a problem. He should have stopped there. He didn't. A week after the wedding, Brad sat Claire down in the new kitchen and explained that her father was a problem that needed solving. Her father was a liability, he said. A drain. The kind of relative who circles back after you've made something of yourself looking for a handout. Brad had built his life alone, he said. No one handed him anything, and he wasn't about to carry dead weight now. I built this on my own, he told her. I don't need a handout from anybody. Claire stared at him. The man she married had been charming, confident, sure of everything. Now she was seeing the contempt that certainty had been hiding. She started screening her father's calls. She started noticing how often Brad measured people by what they cost him. Raymond called her midweek. 3 minutes. He didn't mention the wedding, didn't say a word against Brad, just that he was proud of her and would be there, any hour, for anything. Then he hung up. He knew if he pushed, she'd dig in. That's what people do. So he let her go and went back to the files on his desk. The top page was a hotel receipt from the month before the wedding. Brad, for his part, was satisfied. The embarrassment was excised, his wife was back on script. He got back to the real work of being Bradford Hale. He never thought about Raymond again, never considered that the only man in the room who mattered was the one he'd dismissed. Then Ridgeline Commons started to come apart. It was the ordinary way these things fail, nothing dramatic, just arithmetic. Steel came in over budget. A grading problem cost him 3 weeks he didn't have. A tenant who'd signed a letter of intent got cold feet and walked. Suddenly, the numbers that had always worked on paper stopped working, and Brad needed 2 things fast. The next construction disbursement released on schedule, and a little grace from the bank on the terms. An extension, a covenant waiver, a bank willing to look at a stretched borrower and say, "We believe in you." He wasn't worried. Not really. He was Bradford Hale. He put on his best suit, the charcoal one, and drove to the main branch of Meridian Trust and Savings to sit down with whoever made the decisions. He'd never once wondered who that was. He walked in like he owned the place, gave his name to the woman at the desk, and said he was there to see the person with authority over his loan. The Ridgeline file, he said. The big one. He was told, politely, to have a seat. The decision-maker would be right with him. He straightened his tie, he rehearsed his pitch. He was, in that moment, closer to saving his empire and closer to losing it than he had ever been, and he could feel only the first half of that. A door opened at the end of the hall. The man who came through it was wearing a gray suit, not the worn one from the wedding, a better one, a banker's suit. But the same man, the same steady, unhurried walk, the same level eyes that had looked at Bradford Hale across a ballroom and said nothing, while 200 people watched him get thrown out. Raymond Sutherland. Brad stood up on instinct and then couldn't figure out what to do with his body. His mouth started a sentence and abandoned it. Every assumption he'd built his life on, that the surface tells the truth, that the man in the old truck is nobody, that he himself was the one holding the power in every room. All of it came down at once, silently, like a building being pulled from the inside. Raymond didn't gloat, didn't raise his voice. He said not one word about the wedding or the torn card or his daughter's white face across the ballroom floor. He gestured to a chair, sat down across from his son-in-law, and opened a folder. It was the folder he'd had all along. He laid the documents out on the table, squared to the edge, the way a man does when the papers are going to do the talking. The loan agreement, the construction schedule, the covenants, the boring language Brad had signed without reading, the material adverse change clause, the personal guarantee, and, clipped to the file, the record of exactly where Ridgeline Commons now stood, over budget, behind schedule, a borrower in breach. The project's in default of its terms, Raymond said. I can't authorize the next disbursement. That was all, no triumph in it. He was telling Brad the same thing he would have told any borrower whose numbers had stopped adding up. The difference was only that this borrower had thrown him out of a wedding. The material adverse change clause gave the bank the right to call the loan, Raymond called it. The extension Brad had come for was declined. The line of credit was frozen. And because of the personal guarantee, the one Brad had waved through with his own signature, the failure of Hale Development Group was now, legally, the failure of Bradford Hale himself. It wasn't revenge. Raymond had kept his old promise to the letter. He hadn't bent a single rule or made a single call he wasn't entitled to make. Everything he did, he had the plain legal right to do, because everything Brad had done was written in the file that Raymond's own bank was allowed to read. He simply applied the terms exactly as they were written, with none of the mercy he wasn't required to give. One signature. Cold, legal, and impossible to undo. Brad had spent his whole life certain that a man's worth could be read off the surface. He'd read Raymond Sutherland's surface and gotten it exactly, ruinously wrong. And the terrible thing, the thing that would keep him up at night for years, was how obvious it all looked in hindsight. The clues had been in his hands the whole time. He'd signed them himself. A few months later, Ridgeline Commons changed hands. The half-built shell sold to another developer for a fraction of what Brad poured in. Hale Development Group shrank to a name on a door and a wall of renderings for buildings that would never break ground. The German sedan went back. The Matrides stopped knowing his name. The watch, the car, the labels. One by one, the tools Bradford Hale used to measure a man's worth were stripped away. Without them, he had no way to measure his own. Claire filed for divorce that spring, not because her father asked. He never said a word against Brad, not then, not after. She filed because somewhere in the wreckage she finally saw the man she married, and she understood why her father stayed silent in that ballroom. He wasn't weak. He was protecting her day, even if it cost him his dignity in front of 200 people. When she understood that, she also understood who her father was, and that she never needed to know the size of what he owned to know the size of the man. Raymond didn't celebrate. There was no satisfaction, just the quiet of a thing set right. He still drives the 2004 F-150. He still writes the date on the back of every check in fountain pen ink, small and level. The worn gray suit still hangs in his closet, pressed and ready for the next time a man needs to be underestimated. And in the breast pocket of that suit, folded once along the tier, there's still a seating card with Sutherland printed on it. He keeps it not out of anger, but as a reminder of the day a young man read the surface and never once thought to turn the paper over.